The theme of today's worship is humility. And you're all very lucky to have me as your worship associate. Because humility is one of my best qualities. But seriously, I value humility as a quality in a person. When I'm with people who are humble, they are often compassionate and kind as well. They make me feel comfortable and don't try to put me in my place. I try to cultivate my own humility by asking myself questions like, could I be wrong? What if the opposite were true? Posing these inquiries helps keep me grounded and aware of what I might be missing. As a leader, I think humility is important. I don't brag about my accomplishments. I don't tell people where I went to school or about my degrees. I also don't assume that someone else is going to pick up after me or do the things that I don't want to do just because I'm in a position of authority. However, as a woman leader, the need to be humble can sometimes be an impediment. Women who show themselves off too much can get smacked down. There is a fine line for women in charge, and I definitely find myself walking it, trying to assert myself without being too aggressive, trying to be firm but not harsh. This can be exhausting and debilitating. Holding myself back takes a certain amount of energy. Sometimes I feel like all that I do and have accomplished isn't really noticed or appreciated, and I would like to let everyone know just how great I am. Perhaps the balance lies in knowing what makes me great and also knowing my flaws. For example, I am a great mother. I have raised 2 fabulous kids who are kind and loving, who do well in school, and who feel safe to tell me what they think and what they are doing, and who love me back. And I am a terrible mother. My kids are slobs, they don't do chores, and often don't appreciate all they have in the world. I am a really good dancer. I have great rhythm, and when Rob and I swing dance together, people ooh and ah. And I cannot throw a ball or a frisbee, and I am afraid to make left turns on a bicycle. I am a good writer. I mean, just listen to this amazing reflection. And I am humble. Humility is important. No one likes a know-it-all or an arrogant jerk. But humility doesn't have to mean self-deprecation and avoiding your strengths. There is a way to be confident, competent, proud, and humble.
I'd like to open with a reading. This is an excerpt from Humility, the Quiet Virtue by Everett Worthington Jr. I see humility among the many characteristics it quietly reveals as necessarily involving serving others. William Temple wrote, humility does not mean thinking less of yourself than other people, nor does it mean having a low opinion of your own gifts. It means freedom from thinking about yourself at all. Humility is not letting our minds go blank. Instead, our minds are focused, but instead of focusing on ourselves, we try to discern others' needs. We empathize with them, we sympathize, we feel compassion, we feel and show love for the people who come across as a path, and we loyally yield to virtue. Humility, though, is not merely another word for altruism. People can be altruistic for egotistical motives. They can serve others because they get rewarded for serving. They may seek honor, recognition, awards, a helper's exhilaration, or relief from guilt or helplessness. Egoist altruists act altruistically. This altruism is also a virtue. It is an excellent human quality to aspire to. But humility is more than altruism, done primarily for self-interested motives. Certainly, good feelings arise when anyone helps another person. Yet for the humble person, good feelings and rewards are unsought byproducts, not motivations. His or her motivation is seeing needs, feeling positive emotions towards the needy person, and then acting to meet those needs so that the other person experiences less suffering or more happiness and well-being in life. Those are the words of Everett Worthington Jr. Well, this is one of my series of the 7 lively virtues, as opposed to the 7 deadly sins. And of course, today we're talking about humility, which is a lively virtue to counter the deadly sin of pride. And I have to say, I think ministers are completely the wrong people to talk about humility. Anyone who gets up here on a Sunday and expects people to listen to them for 20 minutes is anything but humble. But I mentioned about how humility and pride are kind of counterpoints to each other. And I think one of the things about pride, of all the 7 deadly sins, is actually the one with more positive attributes. Because in many ways, pride can be a good thing. Having confidence in oneself, being proud of who you are, how you behave, where you're from, those can be really good things. So, pride's a tricky one to really place in that deadly sin category. I mean, it's not like the other deadly sins which are more clear-cut. Pride is a good thing. I mean, we have the LGBTQ Pride Parade, which is a celebration of those people who have been historically marginalized because of their sexual orientation, their gender identity. And it's a really good thing. So pride has a lot of positive elements. But the trouble with pride, it can slip into that arrogance or that sense of your superiority towards another person. So pride needs to be tapered by humility, not squashed but tapered, and bring us into that middle road where we see ourselves as good, but we see others as good. We do not see ourselves superior to them or inferior to them. We see them in true, equal and equitable relationship with us. And of course, I appreciated what Liz said about as a woman, women are often seen as humble and often when they do assert themselves quite appropriately, they're seen as that bossy. You probably saw the T-shirts for young girls saying, "I'm assertive, not bossy." You won't be surprised to hear my daughter had one of those. I so often that people with marginalised identity have been historically marginalised, such as women or the LGBTQ community or the people of different races, are often seen, when they assert themselves, are often seen negatively. So humility is a strange thing. So I really want to think of those of us who are in positions of power and privilege. Humility is very important to temper that sense of superiority or arrogance. And all of us, regardless of our gender identity, regardless of our ethnic background, our race, our gender, we all are in positions of power and privilege at some points in our life. And I think when we are in those positions of power and privilege, it's particularly important to look with humility, as Liz was saying, about that idea of, what if I'm wrong? What if there's this other perspective? What about these people with different life experiences than me? What can they bring to me that could be open to learning? So I think whenever we find ourselves in a power of privilege, whether it's in this religious community, whether it's outside in your work, or it's outside organisations, or maybe it's in your family structure, maybe some humility can just taper a certain arrogance or I know it all. Because have you ever been disappointed in someone when they answer, "I don't know"? I hope not, because I say that a lot. I don't know. I mean, it's a statement of humility, but it's a very honest statement, and I don't think we ever think less. When I hear someone say, "I don't know," I feel I can trust them, because they're not going to bullshit me. And I think that's a really important element of trust, saying, "I don't know." And a man with, I would consider, a big ego, Winston Churchill was once asked, "Doesn't it thrill you to know that every time you make a speech, the hall is packed to overflowing?" And Winston Churchill said, "Yes, it's quite flattering. But whenever I feel that way, I always remember that if instead of making a political speech I was being hanged, the crowd would be twice as big." So I think, life has a way of just kind of reminding us of humility. I think the corona pandemic, for all its tragedy, has probably humbled all of us in a way, and it's probably helped clarify what is important to many of us. But it has been humbling to realize who we are dependent on in society, the frontline workers, who perhaps some of us took for granted prior to the pandemic. But there's a fabulous story about this man who was promoted to vice president of his company, and he was really proud, and he started to get a little arrogant, and he was bragging about it, but saying, "I'm a vice president." And his partner got really fed up with him and said, "Look, it's not such a big deal, you're vice president. Even the supermarket is a vice president of peas." He said, "I don't believe that." So he called up the supermarket and said, "I'd like to speak to the vice president of peas." And the person replied, "Fresh or frozen?" Life is a way of humiliating us, and perhaps no one more so than our family. I know, being a parent, and Liz touched on this, that I don't think I've ever been quite as humbled as by my own family and my own daughter. She asked me a question the other day, actually. It was really funny, and I didn't know the answer. I said, "I don't know." And she said, "When I was younger, did you just make up all the answers?" Because she answered every question I did. I said, "I don't think so, but I might have." But pride can be dangerous as well, because pride is in competition with other people's pride. And pride gets no pleasure out of having something. You only get pride if you have more of it than someone else. And the pride is always that element of comparison and competition. And there was a study done at a business school, and it found that if someone got offered a smaller salary increase and everyone else got less, they were happier than if they got a larger increase and everyone else got more. So much of pride is how we are doing relative to others. It's relational, but there's a dangerous element to pride in regards to relation, whereas humility puts us more in the same playing field as others. So I think, especially if we're struggling with our relationships, adopting an attitude of humbleness or humility can strengthen our relationships because it puts us more in an equitable plane. And Augustine, the ancient Christian thinker from the early parts of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, said, "It is pride that changed angels to devils, and humility makes devils angels." It was pride that changed angels to devils, and humility makes devils angels. I'm not sure it'd quite go that far, but I think it's a strength of like how humility can be transformative for us. But as Liz pointed out, humility's also got a negative side. It can really push people down to be self-effacing to a problem. And I know I would come from a culture, I would say that's a problem, in the Scottish culture, because I'm going to quote from Trainspotting here, the movie, and for any of you who have seen Trainspotting, you have to be very careful quoting for it, because the language is quite strong. But there was a great scene there where those 4 young Scottish men were talking, and I remember having a similar conversation to this about how, there's a lot of anti-English feeling. I said, but he doesn't hate the English. We Scots, we couldn't even get colonised by a decent culture. And it's that element of just feeling unworthy. And I saw that growing up, that it was hard to have a strong sense of personal worth. And it was throughout the culture. I mean, we even got offered a chance for independence, and we voted no. And I think that's some of that, lack of confidence that's instilled in the culture that's unhealthy. So you now know my view on Scottish nationalism. But there was the English writer Rebecca West said this. She said, I myself have never been able to find out what feminism is. I only know that people call me a feminist whenever I express sentiments that differentiate me from a doormat or a prostitute. I think that's really powerful because it was to Lizzie's point, that there's an expectation of those with historically marginalized identities or non-dominant identities to be submissive. And there's an expectation of humility. But do we expect that of our leaders? Do we expect that of those with privileged identities? I don't think so. When humility can be a great temper for our ego. Our ego that puts ourselves at the center of the universe and everyone else pushed to the side. So if humility can just help us edge out the center of our thinking, edge out the center of our influence to experience stuff that I talked about a couple of weeks ago, about experiencing life in the margins. Because when we experience life in the margins, that's where we're going to experience greater spiritual growth. And to live life in the margins, we need to live into our humility. And there's a great story that Stephen Covey tells in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I'm dating myself here. That was the gospel in the corporate world in the 1990s. And there's a great story there about this battleship and the admiral's in the battleship and he's sailing. And this is before they had great radios. And he sees this light in the distance. So they flash this light of Morse code saying, please change direction. And the other light flashes back and says, no, please, could you please change direction? He says, I am Admiral so-and-so. Could you please change direction? And this goes like, I'm a new ensign. Will you please change direction? He said, this is a battleship. The battleship Schmimich. Will you please change direction? And the light comes back. This is a lighthouse. So when our ego is battling reality, we've got to be very careful. There's a time where humility, when people are asking us to do things, that we should listen to them. Because whenever our ego is in conflict with reality, I think our ego is going to lose. And humility means a modesty, an honest opinion of our own worth and our own value. It's a lack of boastfulness, and it is that I'm okay and you're okay. And it's relational in a positive way, where I think pride can be relational in a negative way. And the great 19th century Unitarian minister Ralph Waldo Emerson said, religion is to do right, it's to love right, it is to serve, it is to think, and it is to be humble. And wouldn't religion be a lot better off if there was more humility in it? We see so many examples of God tells me, therefore I can do whatever I like. And I always loved what Abraham Lincoln said, I'm less worried that God is on my side, and I worry more about me being on God's side. I worry more about being on the right side of history. I worry more about living into the ethics and values that are most meaningful to me. And I think Unitarian Universalists, in some ways, we can seem a very confident, dare I say, arrogant bunch, and sometimes I think we've got a debilitating modesty that we don't talk about our religion. We're a little bit embarrassed about being religious. And some of you have heard me say it a number of times, I do not want Unitarian Universalism to be the best kept secret in town. I think we should talk about it, because I think if our values were more prevalent in the world would be a better place. If they're more present in this community, the world would be a better place. So there's a place for humility, but I also think we need to step into our religious identity, step into our congregational identity, and go out there and say, we are proud, we have got something worthy to offer, we've got a life-affirming, life-saving message, and we want to share it. It's not about converting people to our religion. It's about making our values more prevalent in the religion around, the world around us. And I think we can do that in a humble, inclusive, and respectful way. And humility, you need to work carefully. It's a very nuanced virtue. And the author Helen Nielsen said, humility is like underwear, essential but indecent if it shows. I never really thought of humility as indecent. But I think it's reflective of a culture where, we expected to be confident, we're expected to be competent, and humility is still in our culture seen as a sign of weakness. But I think Liz mentioned this, that humble people seem to be modest and truthful. They will say they don't know. They will answer from their place and saying, this is my perspective. You may or may not agree with me. But you can be humble and have a healthy sense of self-esteem. And a healthy heart is one that bows down in humility and rises up in praise and adoration of others. There's a wonderful story from the Japanese tradition, and it talks about this wonderful altar, and it was out of in this forest. And if you went to the altar, you could go and you could see the altar. But if you were to bow down, you saw this beautiful view that you could only see when you bowed down. And it was this beautiful shape of the mountain that you could only see. If you approached the altar standing up, you could not see it for the forest. But if you were to approach it and bow down, you got this blessing of beauty. And I love that idea that sometimes the beauty of the world, the best of the world, is only available when we approach it with humility. In the Dhammapada, the sayings of the Buddha, there's this quote. He says, the thought manifests as the word manifests as the deed develops into a habit, and habit hardens into character. So watch the thought and its ways with care, and let it spring from love, born out of concern for all being, as the shadow follows the body. As we think, so we become. As we think, so we become. So what if we started thinking, balancing that pride with humility, and doing that dance between the two, to approach our life with confidence, but not arrogance. Approaching life with humility, but not superiority. I think that's that middle way that so many religions talk about, not at either extremes, but that middle way between pride and humility. And I think by approaching life with humility, we can practice an attitude of gratitude. I've often said my major goal as a parent was to teach Isla to say please and thank you. Because I think there's a humility, there's a serving of others, there's a welfare of the others. It's not putting yourself at the universe. When you say please, you are realizing that when you ask for something, there's no guarantee that person's going to fulfill what you wish. And when you say thank you, you are noticing that person and appreciating it. So please and thank you are wonderful relational expressions on a daily basis of humility. And I think with humility we can open ourselves to greater spiritual experiences. Some of us have may ruled out the possibility of God, and I understand that. But what if we're wrong? What would it mean to open ourselves to the possibility of a God of your understanding, a God of love, a God of life, a creative force in our lives? What if we opened ourselves to that possibility? How might it shift our life? Nurturing humility for me means being grateful, sharing credit for what we do together, praising the work of others, and being willing or desiring to collaborate to produce better results. And humility also involves acknowledging our mistakes and failures. We are not perfect. We will never be perfect. Khalil Gibran says, keep me away from the wisdom which does not cry, the philosophy which does not laugh, and the greatness which does not bow before children. Humility is that which does not bow before children. That's pride. Humility, we bow before children. We see children as co-educators of us. It's not about us dumping our education on children. It's what we learn from them as we do through our religious education program, through our program, and as we move towards a greater and greater intergenerational community here. And we have to be humble, because the worst things in the world are made of the same stuff that we are. And we have to be confident and proud, because the best things in the world are made of what we are. Humility is a condition of a heart encouraging gratitude, learning from our mistake, and frees us to praise others authentically, and opens us to a beautiful world of wonder and awe.